Good afternoon, everybody. I want to introduce to you Jeremy Almond, directly to my right here, CEO and co-founder of Paystan. We have Peter Knez on the far side there, president and CEO of Teal, and Elisabeth Carpenter, chief strategic engagement officer at Circle. And we are going to talk about frictionless finance. And I actually want to start because I don't know what the knowledge base of everyone in the room is for these issues. Show of hands, how many people know what a stable coin is? Okay, that's a decent amount. How many people know what blockchain is? Okay, so this is a good amount, but not everybody. I don't think every single person raised their hand. So just to kind of set the table and give you sort of a glossary so we have that base of what we're talking about. Just briefly, Elisabeth, I'll start with you. Explain to people what stablecoin is, how it works, the use case.
So the concept behind a stablecoin is that you can imbue into a dollar the superpowers of the internet. So what that means is you literally give someone gives, in our case, Circle, you give us $1, a regular fiat dollar. It gets put into a reserve account that's managed by globally systemic organizations and institutions. In exchange for that, you get a digital dollar, and that digital dollar can now float around the world with the greatest of ease, and it makes transactions as easy, safe, secure, inexpensive as, say, a WhatsApp message. So you don't worry about making phone calls anymore that are cross-border. But boy, oh boy, or sending an email, boy, oh boy, do you think about, cross-border, I have to send money cross-border. Absolutely, you're going to think about it. It's going to take a while. It's going to cost a lot, and so forth. With a digital dollar, you can literally, or a stable coin, and it's called stable, by the way, because it's fully backed by that reserve. It's not a fractional reserve model. You can send money around the world, it's digitized. So it literally has been imbued with the superpowers of the internet.
So I guess stablecoin is the thing that you're sending, and blockchain is the way that you send it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Jeremy, you want to give a brief explanation of blockchain?
Yeah, blockchain is the technology infrastructure, the ledger that keeps track of those payments. So for thousands of years, since the Egyptians' age, we've used ledgers to be able to keep track of who owes what. But forever, there's always been intermediaries or middlemen. Today we know those as banks or the Federal Reserve or other currency. Blockchain is like the internet. It's an open communication platform that anyone can send digital currency or infrastructure over the internet. So it makes the exchange of value as open and accessible as the exchange of communication that the internet did.
So Peter, I want to go to you on sort of the transformational power of this potentially, right? You're a guy who's from the world of TradFi, as we call it, traditional finance. You're not sort of a crypto native, so to speak. And so we've seen in some cases how this has already transformed some lucky or smart people's bank accounts, for example, if they bought Bitcoin a long time ago. But talk a little bit about the transformational power of blockchain and of these kinds of assets when it comes to the global economy and moving money around the world.
Sure, and thanks everybody for the opportunity to speak to you. So I would say, first and foremost, it's important to understand the context in which the transformation is happening, because I think you're seeing it's happening at the same time as sort of the AI transformation, the computational and energy transformation, and the geopolitical transformation. So when you put the digital transformation in that context, I think it's the biggest transformation of my professional career, probably once in a century transformation that's happening. And I'd say there's three ways in which it's really profoundly transforming, both of which Elisabeth and Jeremy can talk to. Number one is really around the settlement layer. So we're going from days to minutes to seconds in settlement globally. Second, you're starting through tokenization and blockchain, immutability and auditability. You're gonna tokenize the large, huge universe of private assets. So as everybody in this room probably understands, most assets in the world are not public, they're private. And since they're private, they're inaccessible. And since they're inaccessible, they're illiquid and oftentimes poorly valued. Through blockchain and tokenization, you'll start to access those assets. So you have the emergence of a massive new asset class, bigger than the public asset classes. So, and then I'd say, lastly, related to Circle and what Elisabeth's done, you're going to see the emergence of stable coins. And in particular, I think in the global south, you'll see sovereign-supported, gold-backed stable coins. And I think you're in the, not years and years, sort of months and months away from really almost the version of the digital Bretton Woods, where you see a new settlement layer emerge for trade between South and South. And so less so more the North-South trade, which, you know, the North more or less said for decades, here's our paper, give us your gold. I think that's over. And so I think you'll see the emergence of a lot of South-South trade based on a digital settlement layer.
So I think that illustrates for us well what the potential is in sort of big global ways, right, between big entities. But I also want to drill down into what it can mean for people, right, individuals. And Elisabeth, on that I want to bring you in because stable coins are already being used for cross-border transactions and to sort of unlock capital flows. But make it real for us. Talk to us about what you're seeing and what you guys are doing at Circle to help facilitate some of that.
Absolutely. So there are a ton of commercial, I mean, basically wherever money flows, a stablecoin can flow. It's just another form of money that is a better form of money. But I think frankly, the humanitarian use cases really paint the best picture. And so we have enabled, so far in a very short period of time, over $25 million in aid to be dispersed to people in the hardest to reach places. And the way that works is that you have an aid organization that's got money in fiat currency. It gets converted to USDC, that's US dollar coin, that's the stable coin that we manage, which is currently the world's largest fully regulated stable coin, and dollar stable coin. And so it gets converted to USDC, and then it travels over a blockchain, as Jeremy was describing, to the end beneficiary. And what's beautiful about this is while it's traveling, it can be tracked, it can be traced. The aid organization can see where it's going. And this is also based on smart contract technology, which means a digital form of a contract that you can program the money so it can only be used in certain ways. For example, it can only be used for food and not for gambling. It can be used for shelter, but not for alcohol or what have you. However, the aid organization wants to do it. And then the end user, depending on where they are and what their own technical capacity is in the country they're in, or what the unique circumstances might be, if there is internet connectivity, then this basically works either on a smartphone or even in some cases we've proven that it can work with just flip phones. And we've also proven that this is the cost savings can be up to 40% in terms of just the transaction. The speed is almost instantaneous and the cost is extremely inexpensive. Because this is not a mainstream technology quite yet, there are still a few little hops and jumps that it has to take, but the reality is that today, this sort of aid distribution can occur, and you're getting money into the hands of everything from, you know, Ukrainian refugees to displaced Venezuelan women living in other Latin American countries trying to rebuild their lives, to Venezuelan frontline healthcare workers, to women in the Middle East who lost their jobs because of a despotic regime that takes over or what have you. These are really compelling stories, and these are very real people who need help in some sort of crisis situation, or perhaps are trying to achieve financial resilience in the case of a person who moves from one country to the other to try to rebuild their life and actually has some funds, but they want to start a business and do something different. The aid funds can be used for that as well. As I said, there's a lot of corollary and analogous business models as well, but those are just some of the few that I think paint a really good picture as to how this helps humans.
And Jeremy, your main business is blockchain-based payments from business to business. But when it comes to kind of the applications we're talking about, what kind of work are you guys doing on that front?
Yeah, so I think what you just heard was it can be both a humanitarian side, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it also can aid critical infrastructure. So my day job is paystand.com, and we are the largest business-to-business payment network in the US built on chain. And what we help do is drive critical infrastructure in the US, so think manufacturing companies, supply chain, insurance, infrastructure, energy, who need to move large sums of money. And most of the money movement that's done in the US for commercial payments is actually done on pre-internet technology, which is wild. 50% is done in checks, which most of you have never used a check in the last decade or so. Almost the rest of it is done on wires that run through the Federal Reserve, which is also highly ineffective and was built in the 60s and 70s. And so blockchain enables, the Bitcoin blockchain enables infrastructure to be moved money at the speed of light in a completely programmable way and at extremely low cost, which has a business bottom line impact for the critical infrastructure companies. So that helps what we consider economic empowerment, so we can create more GDP. So that's the thing that we think is really important for policymakers to understand, is these are critical pieces of your overall economy. But then we think, because one of the most important things about blockchain, and particularly Bitcoin, is the notion of decentralization and open access for everyone. And so our view there is, so we have a philanthropic effort where we give 10% of our profits back to a 501(c) called paystand.org, and we help the areas in the other 7 billion people on the planet that need access to banking. So there, it's all about the stories you just heard, where Bitcoin circular economies are used in the global south, where there is no access to banking, there's no economic reason for banking, and so whether it's an indigenous village in Peru or a gang-ridden town in El Salvador, these are actually community-driven life changes that are happening at the grassroots, at the bottom up, and it has nothing to do with policymakers. It's growing faster than the internet, and it's changing millions of lives all over the planet right now.
I want to zero in on, I think, a word that Elisabeth used, which you emphasized that this is the only dollar-backed, regulated stablecoin. And this also goes back to something that Jeremy said, which is traditionally you did a financial transaction with an intermediary. And there was a reason for that. It was regulated. It was supposed to guarantee you safety. So, Elisabeth, I want to ask you, how do you guarantee or how do you regulate that safety of what we're talking about when you don't have a person or an entity or something in between?
Yeah, well, so there's so many dimensions, so many different ways to answer that question. But in a nutshell, you can't do what we do unless you engender trust. And so even when there was no federal legislation in this country, for example, we were legislated state by state by state. We just did that essentially to ourselves and always walked in through the front door of regulators. And the reason that's critical is that trust is the ultimate currency. There is no, like, I could hold up a paper dollar, and if it can't go buy, the Coke today that it can buy tomorrow that it did buy yesterday, then what's the good of it? You have to trust that it's worth what you think it's worth. So trust is number one, and the way you establish trust is by being pro-regulation, by operating sort of on the right side of history, as it were, by being very transparent about how you operate, how the funds work. You have to show that that dollar that's floating out there as a digital dollar is backed by a fiat dollar and a full reserve account, and you have to attest to that as frequently as we do. And so there's an enormous amount. There's the legislation that legislators write, and then there's the way we basically regulate ourselves. And that's where our we have an enormous compliance team, risk team, fraud team, looking at all the different angles of everything from our customers to how we operate, and making sure that we're paying attention to funds flows and that the money is going where it's supposed to go, and so forth. So it's the same. It's pretty much the same as what happens with normal traditional finance, where there's a lot of oversight as to where that money is going and how it's being managed. But we're doing it in faster, more effective ways, using the most modern technologies through cryptography and blockchain and so forth, to actually establish traceability, transparency, and all of that. And all that goes back to the first point I made, which is trust, because without that, there's nothing.
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, I do think it might be interesting to hear like a slightly other side of the table here, which is both their firm and our firm are regulated entities that are important for institutionalization in the U.S. And so, we work with large companies. We think that regulation and clarity is really important, which we've seen us cross the chasm basically in the last year. What I will say, though, is there's another side to this when we go to the Global South, and it's closer to what Peter was talking about, which is there, things like Bitcoin are used actually as a fight against authoritarianism. And so in those places, actually, it's helpful to have a free movement of money that is able to be used for resistance. So I'll give you some examples. So in Afghanistan, we support a program that helps women create education in areas where it's clearly not able to. I think there you need to be able to get aid to financial aid to these places. We were just in Peru. I was literally there 3 days ago with indigenous people. And they're coming out of Venezuela and Colombia, and they're migrating, and it's very, very difficult for them to access sort of banking. So in there's cases where if you don't give them access to the infrastructure, which many of these regimes will not, you need a way to be able to have freedom, money to be able to exist. So Bitcoin exists in a place for that, again, for the other 7 billion people on the planet. And then blockchain and things like Circle or what Paystand do is helpful for what I would consider highly regulated, highly institutional environments.
Yeah.
So Peter, we've been talking a lot about aid. I'm also curious about the economic opportunity all of this could unlock. And again, not just for established entities, but for the sort of democratization of wealth. How does this work in that way?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think because of these technological innovations and the emerging regulatory frameworks for them, I think for the first time, probably you're going to see true financial integration and financial inclusion in the global South. Because if you really think about the unbanked in the world, there's billions and billions of unbanked people in the global South. And the traditional banking infrastructure will never work for those people, whether it's the KYC issues or access issues because they're in remote areas, et cetera. So what you're really seeing is the confluence of connectivity in those rural areas with the dramatic improvement in connectivity that's happening. And then you marry that connectivity with the blockchain technology and the tokenization and stablecoin technology, you're going to drive financial inclusion through what's called DeFi apps. And as a result, you're going to dramatically see, in my view, you're going to dramatically see an improvement in the efficiency of the supply chain. So I'll give you an example in Indonesia where we're involved. The farmers are getting 8 cents for their product, right? It sells on the global market for $8. That's because there's so many people in the middle just about getting it to the global access to the global market. So it really comes down to access. This technology is an access technology. And that access will dramatically transform those supply chains and dramatically transform the financial health of those people.
If I can just add,
Yes, please.
there are a lot of unbanked people in this country too. And there's even more underbanked. And so exactly what you just said is as relevant in the US. When you think about something like how hard it is to start a small business, it's virtually impossible. 99% of small businesses are not venture backed, only 1% are. The others have to figure out how to do it, and they're often run by one person. And so for those people, what's also really cool about all the technology we're talking about is that it's not just about the transfer of $1 over here and paying for a Coke over there or whatever, or paying a worker here. It also will have enormous impact on credit markets and lending. And so you suddenly have the confluence of all these technologies, and you can mediate between borrowers and lenders, for example. That's a massive, massive untapped unlock that just hasn't happened yet, but absolutely will, and can enable then someone who otherwise would not be able to start a business, for example, and try to even attempt getting some financial resilience, much less subsistence. But that's going to be huge. And so it's exactly the same point. It's a very powerful point. So I just wanted to ladder off that.
We only have about a minute left, but I do want to take one question from the audience, and I want to ask you each briefly to give your answer to this. The question is, how can new generations be educated on digital markets? So I guess it's homework for everybody here and who's listening. Just quickly, like if you had to go to a place or a source or something you could do to learn more about this in the next generation, what would you do? Jeremy, I'll start with you and go down the line.
Yeah, I think financial literacy is really, really important. One of the programs we support is called My First Bitcoin, and it talks about financial literacy for really the global South, but anywhere. We even help kids and migrant farm workers in the U.S. learn these types of tools, because here's something super important that's the common through line. If you have access to mature markets that are good stores of value, that is the greatest producer of wealth. Right? If you do not have access to this and you're saving money under the mattress and your money's eroding under inflation, whether it's in Venezuela or in the US, and you don't have access to the stock market, you don't have access to the real estate market, you cannot grow in the upper ladder. And so things like Bitcoin and stable coins are the greatest enabler for savings technology, which will be the greatest enabler for people to go upward in the market and experiencing the American dream, but everywhere in the world. And so financial literacy matters a ton for that.
Elisabeth?
So you can go to our website. You can even go to websites like Investopedia, which are very good actually. But I would actually just say go to AI, go to ChatGPT, because this stuff is all out there, and get it neatly, nicely summed. As long as you're having it track its sources, there's not a lot of hallucination around basic questions about the potential for all this, because there's so much data out there that the AI can go and grab, and that's where I would start.
I have to agree. I think at the end of the day, the best thing to do, I see AI as a content delivery mechanism is unparalleled. And so just going to the right AI and asking the right questions.
Explain it to me like I'm 5. It's my favorite thing to ask.
And that's, to just close with the Global South. For the Global South, since there's coming connectivity, what AI is going to do for the Global South is drive content. Because you're going to be able to, people that can't read or write or can't speak English, they will be able to learn in their own language, in their own native tongue. It's transformative.
Really fascinating stuff. Thank you so much, Peter, Elisabeth, Jeremy. Thank
you.
you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you all.